They gave us tickets. They told us we were going to see Johnny Carson. They told us we would laugh, go home, sleep. That is what they told us. Nobody told us what was actually going to happen on that stage. Nobody warned us. Nobody could have. I was 22 years old. I did not sleep for 3 days. My hands would not stop shaking. My girlfriend thought I was sick. I was not sick. I was changed.
50 years later, and I am still afraid to tell people what I saw. Because once you hear this story, you will not forget it either. NBC Studios, Burbank, California, November 1971. Friday night, 16 minutes past 11. A production assistant named Gerald Myers is standing in the narrow corridor between dressing rooms 1 and 3, holding a clipboard and sweating through his shirt. He has worked on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson for 2 years. He has handled drunk comedians, feuding actors, a senator who vomited backstage before going on air. None of that prepared him for tonight. Tonight, he is responsible for making sure 2 men reach the studio stage on time. One of those men is Bruce Lee. The other is André the Giant. And 12 minutes ago, something happened in the hallway between their dressing rooms that has changed the entire plan for tonight's show. It started 3 weeks earlier in Johnny Carson's private office on the 2nd floor of the NBC Burbank building. Carson was meeting with his producer, Fred de Cordova, a veteran Hollywood director who had joined the show the previous year. They were planning a special episode. Ratings had dipped slightly during November sweeps, and the network wanted something big, something people would talk about at work on Monday morning. "I want Bruce Lee back," Carson said, leaning back in his leather chair, tossing a pencil between his fingers. "The audience loved him last time. The mail we got after his appearance was unbelievable. People are still talking about it." Fred nodded. "Bruce is available. He's between projects right now. Waiting on a film deal with Warner Brothers. He'd probably welcome the exposure." "Good. But I don't want just a repeat of last time. I don't want him breaking boards and talking about water. I want something different. Something with tension." Fred paused. "What kind of tension?" Carson smiled. The smile that Ed McMahon once described as the most dangerous expression in television because it meant Johnny had an idea, and Johnny's ideas were either brilliant or catastrophic with very little middle ground. What if we put him with someone big? And I mean physically big. Someone so large that the audience immediately thinks there's no way Bruce Lee could handle him. Someone who makes Bruce look like a child. And then we let them interact. We don't script it. We don't choreograph it. We just put them together and see what happens. Fred considered this. "Who did you have in mind?" "There's a wrestler. French. They call him André the Giant. He's about 7 feet tall, over 400 pounds. He's been wrestling in Montreal, selling out arenas. Vincent McMahon has been booking him across the country as a special attraction. He's enormous, and from what I hear, he's got a personality. He's charming when he wants to be, but he's also got an ego. He doesn't like being upstaged, and he definitely doesn't like being told someone is more impressive than he is." Fred leaned forward. "Johnny, if we put a 400-pound professional wrestler next to a 135-pound martial artist on live television and something goes wrong, that's why people will watch, Fred." That conversation set everything in motion. Invitations were sent. Bruce Lee accepted within a day. He was eager for American television exposure. His film career in Hong Kong was exploding, but Hollywood still saw him as a supporting player, a sidekick, a novelty act. Every major network appearance was a chance to change that perception. André's booking was more complicated. He was on tour with wrestling promotions across the Eastern Seaboard. His schedule was brutal, performing 4 to 5 nights a week in different cities. But when his manager heard the words "Tonight Show" and 28 million viewers, the schedule was rearranged. André would fly from a show in Philadelphia on Thursday night directly to Los Angeles on Friday morning. He would arrive at NBC Studios by 4 p.m. Plenty of time. That was the plan. Clean, simple, professional. But plans have a way of breaking when they collide with reality. And reality, on this particular Friday in November 1971, weighed 420 pounds and had been drinking since noon. André's flight from Philadelphia landed at LAX at 1:47 p.m. He had slept maybe 2 hours on the plane, folded into 2 first-class seats that the airline had awkwardly tried to accommodate by removing the armrest between them. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The world was not built for André René Roussimoff. Airplane seats were not built for him. Hotel beds were not built for him. Doorways were not built for him. He had spent his entire life forcing himself into spaces designed for smaller humans, and it had made him, depending on his mood, either quietly philosophical or violently angry. Today his mood was the second kind. His manager, Frank Valois, a Canadian former wrestler who had known André since 1966, met him at the airport with a rented Lincoln Continental, the only car with enough legroom. André folded himself into the passenger seat, his knees pressing against the dashboard, his head touching the roof even with the seat pushed all the way back. He said nothing for the first 20 minutes of the drive. Then he spoke. "Who is this other guest?" His voice was deep, French accented, like something rumbling up from underground. Frank glanced sideways. "His name is Bruce Lee. He's a martial artist, used to be on the Green Hornet. He's big in Hong Kong right now, making kung fu movies." André made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a grunt. Something dismissive. Something that came from a man who had spent his life being the biggest, the strongest, the most physically dominant person in every room he had ever entered. A man who had never in his adult life met someone he considered a physical threat. "A kung fu actor," André repeated, "and they want to put him next to me, on television. For what purpose?" "Entertainment, André. That's what the show is. They want the contrast, the size difference. Carson thinks it will be good television." "Carson thinks putting a small man next to me is entertainment." André's jaw tightened. "I am not a circus animal, Frank. I am not a prop for some little actor to stand next to so people can laugh at how big I am." Frank said nothing. He had learned over 5 years of managing André that when the giant was in this mood, silence was safer than words. What Frank did not mention, what he deliberately chose not to mention, was something he had overheard from one of Carson's producers during a phone call 2 days earlier. The producer had said, casually, almost as a joke, "Carson's been telling people that Bruce Lee is the most impressive physical specimen he's ever had on the show." Frank knew what those words would do to André. André, who had been called the 8th wonder of the world. André, who could lift 400 pounds over his head. André, who had once flipped a car onto its side during a bar fight in Montreal because someone had called him a freak. If André heard that Johnny Carson considered a 135-pound kung fu instructor more physically impressive than him, tonight would not go well. André arrived at NBC Studios at 4:22 p.m., 38 minutes behind schedule. The production team had prepared for his arrival. They had measured the doorways. They had reinforced the chair in dressing room 3. They had even stocked his dressing room with what his rider specified, 2 cases of French wine and 1 case of Molson Canadian beer. André drank like a man 3 times his size, which mathematically he essentially was. On an average night, he consumed 30 to 40 beers without showing visible impairment. It was a biological reality of his condition. Acromegaly enlarged everything, including his capacity to metabolize alcohol, at a rate that would hospitalize a normal human. By the time the show's stage manager came to brief André on the format at 7 p.m., 6 bottles of wine were empty, and André had moved on to the beer. He wasn't drunk, not by his standards, but there was a looseness in him, a warmth in his eyes that could turn cold in an instant, an unpredictability that made the stage manager choose his words very carefully. "Mr. Roussimoff, you'll be the second guest tonight. Mr. Lee will come out first, do his segment with Johnny, and then you'll be introduced. Johnny will bring you out, you'll sit down, and then he'll facilitate a conversation between the two of you. Light, fun, entertaining, nothing physical, just conversation." André looked at the stage manager, looked down at him from a height that made the man feel like a child standing before a monument. "Nothing physical," André repeated slowly, his accent thickening the words. Then he smiled, a smile that showed teeth but contained no warmth. "We will see." Bruce Lee arrived at NBC Studios at 5:15 p.m., almost 3 hours before showtime. He came alone. No entourage, no manager hovering, no publicist whispering instructions. Just Bruce, carrying a small leather bag, wearing a navy blue suit that his wife Linda had picked out for him that morning in their Bel Air home. He had kissed his 2-year-old daughter Shannon goodbye, told his 6-year-old son Brandon to behave for his mother, and driven himself to Burbank in his black Mercedes. Quietly, calmly, the way he did everything. The production assistant who met him at the studio entrance was a young woman named Carol. She recognized him instantly, and her eyes went wide. Not because he was famous, though he was, but because in person, Bruce Lee radiated something that cameras only partially captured. There was a stillness to him, a coiled readiness, like a spring compressed to its absolute limit, but held perfectly in place. He moved through the corridor, and she noticed his footsteps made no sound. None. On a concrete floor, she would tell this story for years afterward. The man walked like he was floating. Bruce was shown to dressing room 1. Small, simple, a mirror with lights, a rack for clothes, a small couch, a table with water and fruit. He set his bag down, removed his suit jacket carefully, and began to stretch. Slowly, methodically, every joint, every muscle, a ritual he performed before any public appearance. Not for performance, for readiness. Bruce Lee did not believe in warming up for show. He believed in being prepared for anything. At 6:30 p.m., Carson's producer, Fred de Cordova, came to Bruce's dressing room for the pre-show briefing. Fred knocked twice, heard a calm "come in," and entered to find Bruce standing in the center of the room, perfectly still, eyes closed. Fred waited. He knew enough about Bruce Lee not to interrupt whatever this was. Bruce opened his eyes. "Fred, good to see you again." "Bruce, thanks for coming. Johnny's thrilled you're here. Listen, I need to walk you through tonight's format." "Of course. You'll be the first guest. You'll come out, sit with Johnny. He'll ask you about your career, your philosophy, what you've been working on. Standard stuff, maybe 8 to 10 minutes. Then we bring out the second guest." Fred paused. "The second guest is a professional wrestler named André the Giant. He's very large. Johnny wants to create a moment between the two of you. A conversation about size versus skill, strength versus speed, that kind of thing. Light, playful, nothing physical." Bruce looked at Fred with those eyes, those dark, penetrating, impossibly focused eyes that made people feel like they were being read at a molecular level. "You said that twice," Bruce observed quietly. "Nothing physical. Why do you feel the need to say it twice?" Fred shifted his weight. "André is unpredictable. He's been drinking since he arrived. Not drunk, but loosened up. And he's heard that Johnny called you the most impressive physical specimen to ever appear on the show. I don't know who told him that, but he knows, and he's not happy about it." Bruce said nothing for a moment, then very softly, almost to himself, "A drunk giant who feels disrespected on live television in front of 28 million people. Bruce, if you're uncomfortable, we can restructure the—" "I'm not uncomfortable, Fred." Bruce's voice was quiet but absolute, like a door closing, like a lock clicking into place. "I'm never uncomfortable, I'm just calculating." Fred left the dressing room feeling something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling you get when you realize you've put two volatile elements in proximity and the chemical reaction is no longer within your control. At 8:45 p.m., 45 minutes before showtime, it happened. The thing that changed everything. The incident in the hallway that would turn a planned television segment into something no one in the building was prepared for. André left his dressing room to use the bathroom. The backstage bathroom was 30 feet down the corridor, past dressing room 1, past Bruce Lee's door. André walked down the hallway, each footstep a small earthquake, the floor vibrating under 420 pounds of mass. As he passed dressing room 1, the door was open. Bruce was inside, shadowboxing, moving with a speed that didn't seem possible for a human body. His fists were blurs. His feet barely touched the ground. He was making sounds, sharp exhales, controlled bursts of breath that punctuated each strike like small explosions. André stopped. He stood in the doorway, filling it completely, blocking the light from the corridor. His massive frame cast a shadow that swallowed the entire room. He watched Bruce move for exactly 4 seconds. Then he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not an appreciative laugh. a deep, rumbling, contemptuous laugh that came from his belly and filled the corridor like thunder rolling through a canyon. Bruce stopped mid-strike, turned, saw the mountain filling his doorway. Their eyes met for the first time. André leaned against the doorframe. The wood creaked under his weight. He looked down at Bruce the way a man looks at an insect that has landed on his dinner plate, mild curiosity mixed with absolute contempt. "So, you are the little kung fu man," André said. His voice filled the small dressing room like smoke filling a jar. "The one Johnny thinks is so impressive, the most impressive physical specimen." He repeated the phrase slowly, tasting each word, letting the mockery drip from every syllable. "I have seen impressive. I have fought impressive. You are not impressive. You are small. You are fragile. And if we were not on television tonight, I would show you what impressive really means." Bruce stood perfectly still. His hands were at his sides. His breathing had not changed. His heart rate had not increased. He looked up at André the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Not with emotion, with information. "You're blocking my doorway," Bruce said quietly. André didn't move. Instead, he leaned further in, his enormous head now inside the dressing room, his shoulders wedged against both sides of the frame. The wood groaned louder. "In my country, little men do not tell big men what to do. In my country, little men step aside. They lower their eyes. They know their place." "This isn't your country," Bruce said. Same tone, same volume, same absolute calm that was starting to unnerve André more than any threat could have, because André understood threats. He had lived his entire life in a world of threats. What he did not understand was a man who showed no fear while standing 5 feet from someone who could crush his skull with one hand. Gerald Myers, the production assistant, turned the corner at that exact moment carrying his clipboard. He saw André filling Bruce Lee's doorway, saw the posture, saw the energy between them, and his stomach dropped to the floor. He froze. His training told him to intervene. His survival instinct told him to run. André straightened up, pulling himself out of the doorframe. He looked at Gerald, then back at Bruce. "Tonight," André said, pointing one massive finger at Bruce, a finger thicker than most men's wrists. "Tonight, when we are on that stage together, I am going to pick you up. I am going to lift you over my head like a child, and 28 million people are going to see what you really are. Small, helpless, nothing, and you will never fight again after tonight, because everyone in America will see that you are a toy, a little toy that I can break whenever I choose." André turned and walked toward the bathroom, each step shaking the framed photographs on the corridor walls. Gerald pressed himself against the wall to let him pass, the way you press yourself against a building when a truck passes too close on a narrow street. When André was gone, Gerald rushed to Bruce's dressing room. "Mr. Lee, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. Are you okay? Do you want me to call security? I can talk to Fred. We can cancel the joint segment. We can keep you separated." "Gerald!" Bruce's voice stopped him mid-sentence. "What is your name again?" "Gerald. Gerald Myers, sir." "Gerald, how long have you worked on this show?" 2 years, Mr. Lee." "In 2 years, have you ever seen an episode that people remembered the next day?" Gerald thought about it. "A few, maybe 3 or 4. "What made those episodes memorable?" Gerald opened his mouth, closed it, thought harder. Something unexpected happened, something that wasn't in the script. Bruce smiled, the first smile Gerald had seen from him all evening. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had just been given exactly what he wanted. "Go tell Fred that the show goes on as planned. Both segments, no changes. André comes out after me. Everything proceeds exactly as scheduled." "But Mr. Lee, he threatened to." "I heard what he said, Gerald. Every word." Bruce turned back to the mirror and adjusted his tie. His hands were perfectly steady. "He said he's going to pick me up in front of 28 million people. That's a promise I very much want him to try to keep." 11:31 p.m. The show is live. 28 million Americans are watching. Ed McMahon has delivered his legendary introduction. Johnny Carson has walked through the curtain, done his monologue, landed every joke, And now he's sitting behind his desk, the iconic Los Angeles skyline painted behind him, the NBC orchestra settling into silence. Carson turns to camera 2 with that look, that specific Johnny Carson look that tells America something special is coming. My first guest tonight is a man who, the last time he was on this show, generated more mail than any guest we've had this year. He is a martial artist, an actor, a philosopher, and frankly, one of the most extraordinary human beings I've ever met. Please welcome Bruce Lee. The curtain parts, Bruce steps through, and the studio audience of 450 people does something that almost never happens on The Tonight Show. They stand. A full standing ovation before he has said a single word. Bruce walks to the desk with that walk, the one that Carol, the production assistant, described as floating, and shakes Carson's hand. His grip is firm but controlled. Everything about Bruce Lee is controlled. He sits. The applause continues for 11 seconds. Carson lets it ride. He knows good television when he sees it. When the audience finally settles, Carson leans forward. Bruce, last time you were here, you did something to my hand during a handshake that I felt for 3 days. My doctor asked me if I'd been in an accident. What did you do to me? The audience laughs. Bruce smiles. I simply redirected the energy of your grip back into your own wrist. It's a basic principle. Use your opponent's force against him, even in a handshake. So every time I shake your hand, I'm essentially attacking myself? In a manner of speaking, yes. That explains my entire career in television. The audience roars. Carson is in his element now. The rhythm between them is perfect. Two performers who understand timing at a cellular level, feeding off each other, building something electric. They talk for 8 minutes. Bruce discusses his philosophy of Jeet Kune Do. He explains the concept of being like water. Carson asks smart questions, the kind that reveal he has actually studied his guest, not just read the cue cards. Bruce demonstrates a technique on Carson's hand, gently, and Carson's eyes go wide with genuine amazement. The audience gasps. It's beautiful television, effortless. Then Carson's expression shifts. Subtle, almost imperceptible. But Bruce catches it immediately because Bruce catches everything. Carson is about to introduce the second guest, and there's something in Carson's eyes that looks almost like an apology. Bruce, I want you to stay right where you are because my next guest is someone I think you'll find very interesting. He stands nearly 7 feet tall. He weighs over 400 pounds. He is called the 8th wonder of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, André the Giant. The curtain parts again, and the sound that comes from the studio audience is not applause, it's a gasp. A collective, involuntary intake of breath from 450 people who are suddenly confronted with something their brains cannot immediately process. André steps through the curtain, and the stage seems to shrink. The desk seems smaller. The chairs seem like dollhouse furniture. Carson, who is 6 feet tall, looks like a child. The painted skyline behind the set looks like it belongs to a toy city. André is wearing a black suit, custom-made. The jacket alone used enough fabric to make 3 normal suits. His white shirt is open at the collar because no tie manufacturer makes ties for a neck that thick. His hands hang at his sides like 2 sledgehammers wrapped in skin. He walks toward the desk, and each step sends a vibration through the studio floor that the audience can feel in their seats. Bruce does not stand. He remains seated, turned slightly in his chair, watching André approach. His eyes are tracking, calculating, measuring stride length, weight distribution, balance points, the slight favoring of the left knee that tells Bruce that André's right leg bears more structural damage. In the 4 seconds it takes André to walk from the curtain to the desk, Bruce Lee has already identified 11 vulnerabilities in the giant's body. André reaches the desk. He does not sit. He stands, towering over everyone, looking down at Bruce Lee the way a cathedral ceiling looks down at a prayer candle. So, André says into the microphone Carson has angled upward for him, this is the little man who is more impressive than me. 28 million people hold their breath. Carson felt it immediately. The temperature in the studio shifted. The audience, which had been laughing and warm 30 seconds ago, was now silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that happens when 450 people simultaneously realize they might be about to witness something they didn't buy tickets for. "André, welcome to the show," Carson said, his voice steady, professional, but his eyes were doing something his voice wasn't. His eyes were calculating escape routes. "Please, have a seat. We've got a specially reinforced chair for you right here." André ignored the chair. He remained standing, looking at Bruce. "I don't want to sit," André said. "I want to stand. I like to stand when I meet small people. It reminds them of something important." "And what's that?" Carson asked, trying to steer the conversation into humor, trying to find the joke, trying to do what he did better than anyone in television, diffuse tension with timing. "Their place," André said. No smile now. The words landed on the studio like stones dropped into still water. Bruce hadn't moved, hadn't shifted in his chair, hadn't uncrossed his legs. He was watching André with an expression that the camera couldn't quite capture, but the studio audience could feel. It was patience, not passive patience, not waiting for it to be over patience. The patience of something hunting, the patience of a cobra watching a water buffalo stumble closer to the tall grass. Carson tried again. "André, Bruce was just telling us about his philosophy of martial arts, about being like water, about adaptability. As a wrestler, as someone who uses his incredible size as his primary weapon, what do you think about the idea that speed and technique can overcome raw power?" André finally looked at Carson, then back at Bruce. Then he laughed, that same contemptuous laugh from the hallway. But now it was amplified through the studio's sound system. Now 28 million people heard it. "Speed and technique," André repeated, his accent making the words sound like a verdict being delivered. "I will show you speed and technique." He moved, fast, shockingly fast for a man his size. He reached down, grabbed the armrest of Bruce's chair with one hand and lifted. Not the armrest, the entire chair. With Bruce Lee sitting in it, he raised it 6 inches off the ground with one arm, holding it suspended in the air, holding a 135-pound man and a 40-pound chair with one hand as casually as a normal person holds a coffee cup. The audience screamed, not cheered, screamed. Carson shot to his feet, his chair rolling backward and hitting the desk. Ed McMahon half stood from his position, his face showing genuine alarm. The camera operators, trained professionals who had filmed everything from presidential candidates to drunken comedians, didn't know where to point their cameras. And Bruce Lee, suspended in the air in a chair held by a giant, did something that nobody in that studio, nobody among the 28 million watching at home, nobody in the entire history of television had ever seen before. He didn't panic. He didn't grab the armrests. He didn't struggle or shout or flail. In the fraction of a second between the chair leaving the ground and reaching its peak height, Bruce uncrossed his legs, shifted his center of gravity, and stood up on the seat of the chair. He was now balanced on a chair that was being held in the air by a man who intended to humiliate him. And from that elevated position, standing on the chair seat, Bruce Lee was eye level with André the Giant for the first and only time. Their faces were 18 inches apart. André's hand was still gripping the chair, his arm still extended, but his face had changed. The contempt was gone. The mockery was gone. Something else had replaced it. Something André had not felt since he was a child in Coulommiers being told by doctors that his body would never stop growing. Something cold. Something unfamiliar. Bruce looked directly into André's eyes. Not up at them. Into them. Level. Equal. And he said 5 words that 28 million people heard with perfect clarity. "Put the chair down now." The studio was so silent you could hear the electric hum of the stage lights. André's arm began to tremble. Not from the weight. 135 pounds was nothing to a man who had lifted 400-pound wrestlers over his head in arenas across the world. His arm was trembling because something was happening that his body could not explain to his brain. Bruce Lee, standing on that suspended chair, had placed 2 fingers on the inside of André's wrist. Just 2 fingers. The index and middle finger of his right hand pressed into the soft tissue between the 2 tendons on the underside of André's massive forearm. The pressure was precise, surgical, applied to a nerve cluster that most people don't know exists, and that Bruce Lee had spent 15 years learning to find blindfolded. Andre's hand opened involuntarily. His fingers released the armrest, not because he chose to let go, because his nervous system betrayed him. The signal from his brain that said grip was overridden by a signal from his wrist that said release. And in that fraction of a second, as Andre's hand opened and the chair began to drop, Bruce moved. He didn't jump from the chair. He stepped off it, 1 foot to the armrest, 1 foot to the desk, and then he was standing on Johnny Carson's desk, looking down at Andre the Giant. Looking down at a man the world called the 8th wonder of the world on live television, in front of 28 million people. Bruce Lee was standing on the desk, perfectly balanced, his navy suit unwrinkled, his tie still straight, not a single hair displaced, and he was looking down at Andre the Giant. The chair hit the floor with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The audience jumped. Carson, who had backed against the painted skyline, was pressing both hands against the set wall behind him. Ed McMahon had his hand on the telephone beside his chair, ready to call security, ready to call anyone. Doc Severinsen had stood up from behind his music stand, his trumpet still in one hand, his mouth open. And Andre stood there, looking up, for the first time in his adult life, looking up at another human being. His brain could not process this. He was Andre the Giant. People looked up at him. That was how the world worked. That was the fundamental law of his existence. He was tall. Everyone else was short. He was big. Everyone else was small. And now a 135-pound man was standing on a desk looking down at him with an expression that contained no fear, no anger, no triumph. Just stillness. Just absolute, terrifying calm. "I asked you to put the chair down," Bruce said. His voice carried through the studio without a microphone, clear, controlled, every consonant precise. "You chose not to listen, so I solved the problem myself. That is what I do. I don't wait for the world to accommodate me. I adapt. I overcome. I find the solution that no one else sees. That is not kung fu, Andre. That is not a trick. That is what happens when you underestimate someone based on their size." Andre said nothing. His mouth was slightly open. His right hand, the one that had held the chair, was opening and closing slowly, involuntarily, the nerve cluster still firing confused signals. He looked at his own hand as if it belonged to a stranger. Then he looked back up at Bruce. The studio audience had not breathed in what felt like a full minute. 28 million living rooms across America were frozen. Husbands had stopped drinking their beer. Wives had stopped folding laundry. Teenagers who were supposed to be in bed were standing in hallways watching through cracked doors. Nobody changed the channel. Nobody even blinked. Carson, from his position against the back wall, did something extraordinary. Something that proved why he was the greatest television host who ever lived. He started to laugh. Not nervous laughter, not panicked laughter. Genuine, full-bodied Johnny Carson laughter that broke the tension like a hammer through a window. "Bruce," Carson said, still laughing, straightening his tie, walking back toward his desk where a martial artist was still standing. "In 30 years of television, I have never had a guest stand on my desk, and I have to say, you're the first one I didn't want to stop." The audience exploded. Laughter, cheering, applause that shook the studio walls. Bruce looked down at Carson and smiled. Then he did something that would become the single most replayed moment in Tonight Show history. He looked at Andre, gave a small, respectful bow, and then dropped from the desk back into his chair in one fluid motion. No jump, no stumble, no adjustment, just gravity and grace. He landed in the chair, crossed his legs and adjusted his tie as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just done the impossible on live television. Andre stood motionless for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours to every person in that studio. Then something happened that no one expected. Not Carson, not the audience, not the 28 million people watching at home, not even Bruce Lee. Andre sat down. He pulled the reinforced chair toward the desk, lowered his 420-pound frame into it and sat. The chair groaned but held. And then Andre the Giant, the 8th wonder of the world, the man who had never in his adult life shown submission to any human being on this planet, turned to Bruce Lee and said 7 words that would be quoted in every martial arts magazine, every wrestling publication, and every television retrospective for the next 50 years. "I have never met a man like you." His voice cracked on the last word, not from emotion, from something deeper, from the tectonic shift that happens inside a human being when a belief they have carried their entire life is shattered in 4 seconds by 2 fingers on a wrist. The audience erupted again, but this time it was different. This wasn't shock, this wasn't entertainment. This was 450 people witnessing something genuine, something unscripted, something that could not be manufactured or rehearsed or produced by any network executive. A giant had just acknowledged a man 1/3 his size as his equal, on live television, without being forced, without being defeated, simply because he recognized something in Bruce Lee that transcended physical measurement. Carson, sensing the moment with the instinct of a man who had hosted 10,000 hours of live television, did not crack a joke, did not deflect, did not go to commercial. He leaned forward and asked the question that every single person watching wanted answered. "André, what just happened? Help us understand what we just saw." André looked at his right hand again, opened it, closed it. The nerve was still tingling. He looked at Carson, then at the audience, then at Bruce. "I have been the biggest man in every room since I was 14 years old," André said slowly. "Every room, every arena, every country. I've never been afraid of any man. I walked into this studio tonight believing that size is everything, that strength is everything, that this small man was a joke." He paused. The studio was absolutely silent. "He made my hand open. I did not choose to open it. He decided my hand would open. And it opened. My body listened to him instead of me. No man has ever done that. No man has ever taken control of my body away from me. I weigh 420 pounds, and he controlled me with 2 fingers." André turned to Bruce. "How?" Bruce uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. "Your size is a gift, André, but you have been using it as a weapon for so long that you forgot it is also a vulnerability. Every nerve in your body is larger than a normal person's nerve. Every pressure point is closer to the surface. Your size doesn't protect you from precision. It makes you more vulnerable to it. The bigger the machine, the smaller the wrench needed to stop it." André stared at Bruce for a long moment. Then he did something that Backstage crew members would swear they never saw André do before or after that night. He extended his hand, not to grab, not to crush, not to intimidate, to shake. His massive hand hung in the air between them, open, waiting. Bruce took it. His entire hand disappeared inside André's grip. They shook once, firm, respectful. 2 men from opposite ends of the physical spectrum acknowledging each other across a distance that most people thought could never be bridged. Carson looked into camera 1. His eyes were wet. He would deny it in interviews for years, but the tape doesn't lie. Johnny Carson, the coolest man in television, the man who never broke, had tears in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carson said, his voice carrying 30 years of television experience and something new, something raw. "I have hosted this show for 9 years. I have sat at this desk with presidents, astronauts, movie stars, and legends. And I am telling you right now, tonight, what you just witnessed will never be matched. Not on this show, not on any show. You just watched something real, and in this business, real is the rarest thing there is." The Tonight Show went to commercial. When it came back, André and Bruce were gone from the desk. But backstage, in the narrow corridor between dressing rooms 1 and 3, Gerald Myers, the production assistant, witnessed something he kept private for over 30 years. André was sitting on the concrete floor, his back against the wall, his legs stretched across the entire width of the corridor. Bruce was sitting beside him. 2 men who, 90 minutes earlier, had been adversaries, were now talking quietly. André was asking about pressure points. Bruce was explaining the meridian system. André was listening with the focus of a first-day student. And Bruce was teaching with the patience of a man who understood that the most important victories are not the ones the world sees, but the ones that happen in quiet hallways after the cameras stop rolling and the audience goes home and two people who were supposed to be enemies discover they have more in common than anyone, including themselves, ever imagined. André never spoke publicly about that night, but 3 weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived at Bruce Lee's home in Bel Air. The handwriting was enormous, each letter nearly an inch tall, written by hands too large for normal penmanship. It said simply, "You are the only man who ever made me feel small. Thank you. It was the best feeling of my life. Your friend, André."